back to The Verdict, Milnick's podcast dedicated to navigating the ever-evolving landscape of medical professional liability insurance, healthcare law, and risk management. I'm your host, Tammie Smeltz. As we continue to celebrate our 50th anniversary of serving New York's healthcare community, we're more committed than ever to bringing you timely, expert discussions designed to help you navigate challenges, learn more about Milnick's products and services, mitigate potential risks, and ultimately stay ahead in your practice. My guest today is medical malpractice defense attorney and partner at the law firm of Rubin, Paterniti Gonzalez Rizzo Kaufman, Roy Kaufman. Good morning, Roy, and welcome back to The Verdict. I could not wait to have you on as a guest again. I think this is our second time together, and I know that our viewers and our listeners are really excited to hear what you have to say about trials. So today we are going to talk about what we never learned about trials. Before we get started, do you want to just tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Well, I'm not John Ehrman, I can tell you that. You know, this guy thinks he's Travis Kelce. I'm not sure what's going on with him, but his podcast needs to step it up a bit.
Well, I'm not a Travis Kelce fan, and maybe I shouldn't even say that, but maybe we'll go with he's no Josh Allen.
No one is Josh Allen. So now that we've got the Western New York audience behind us, I'm on the other end of the state, although I spent a lot of time in Buffalo, both as a student and as a young hospital administrator. So I've got some real affectionate ties, and I'm looking forward to going back up there when they win a Super Bowl. But I'm a, what's the proper term? Seasoned medical malpractice defense lawyer who still enjoys what he does, and more importantly, this is a lot of fun doing these podcasts. So thank you for having me back.
You're welcome. And I know our viewers can't see you because this is audio only, but you can really see the joy in your face when you talk about your working as a med mal lawyer and also being on the podcast.
Thank
So
you.
I guess my first question to you today regarding trials would be, what would surprise people most about trials?
So let me turn that around, Tammie. When you were a young person, you'd see probably two of the same movies every year, right? It's a Wonderful Life and The Wizard of Oz. And the gotcha moment from A Wizard of Oz was when they pulled the curtain back, exposing the wizard, right? So the real truth about trials, what I mean by that is if you took a dozen trial lawyers and you had to convince them, not too hard, to go to a bar and talk about their trials and their verdicts, or you drag them to confession, okay? What they'd really tell you is that about half the cases they've won were actually lost by the other side. What do I
Interesting.
mean by that? It's the jury hated the plaintiff because they thought they were lying or embellishing their damages, or they thought a witness was unprepared. And that's the dirty little secret trial lawyers don't want you to know, which is you can lose a case as easily as you can win a case. So preparation is always the key.
It's funny that you mentioned The Wizard of Oz because, believe it or not, my neighbor turned 60 a couple of weeks ago, and what she wanted to do was watch The Wizard of Oz in her backyard. So we got one of those big blow up movie screens and we watched it, and I have probably not seen it since I was 5 or 6 years old. So it's just funny that you mentioned that. And I totally
Tammy, can
agree.
I make one other point about like what jurors are looking for? And I probably will break a couple of rules here, but uh, a good example is politics these days. And I know we're not supposed to talk about politics, but if you think about what happens in an election, when you go into a voting booth, at least half of the people who vote for a specific candidate or for a specific position. But at least half of them vote against the candidate they dislike the most. Okay? And that's really the same concept that takes place when jurors go in to deliberate.
Yeah, that's a great point, Roy. And correct me if I'm wrong. I sort of recall that there's actually a service that insurance companies and maybe law firms retain to help physicians that may be an unfavorable witness become more likable, right? I believe there is an organization that helps make a defense witness look better.
There are multiple companies that do that these days, and the older seasoned trial lawyers were initially resistant to these people by basically saying, what can they do better than me? And we've come to learn they could do a lot better because they're trained in the psychology of trials. They understand jurors. So we use them a lot for deposition preps, but also we use them for trial prep. And they teach a lot of the concepts that we're going to talk about today. They go over them and they make suboptimal witnesses much better.
Yeah, I think, I worked in claims for a long time, and back in the late 1990s and early 2000s, we weren't using these services. Defense attorneys were, working hard to help coach their witnesses, but now, maybe it's a little easier with these organizations. Now, let me ask you this. What resonates with a jury? What do you have to do to make a witness, to help a jury relate to your witness as opposed to maybe the plaintiff or the plaintiff's expert witness?
Well, I guess the first concept is that a witness has to think about what's important to a patient to change their perspective. And I guess there was a movie many years ago. I'm not sure if William Hurt was in it or someone else, where it was a physician who became a patient and had a whole new perspective on medicine. And I hear that quite a lot, that when a physician has a loved one or themselves who becomes the patient, they see medicine from a completely different perspective. And that's a good gauge as to what to do at trial is imagine hearing this case from the role of a patient. And that usually helps them relate much better.
Yes, and that makes sense for sure. Now let's go back for a moment to the witnesses. What is it about trial that is most uncomfortable for a witness?
So someone taught me not too long ago a phrase called a performative experience. You're probably pretty familiar with that, but I really wasn't, so I had to look it up. And I guess the definition is to create a certain impression or convey a particular message. And if you think about it, well, trial lawyers do that every day. You need to come up with a message. But in the practice of medicine or dentistry, that's not something that everyone does on a daily basis. Um, Experts sign on to this all the time. They love the battle of the courtroom. They love to be on stage. They like the give and take. Enjoy it. But someone who's being sued, that's a completely different experience. It's your reputation is being challenged a bit. Your actions are definitely being challenged. And think about it from the perspective of foreign-born physicians and dentists. They may not be trusting of our legal system. They may not be trusting of the community that they practice in, which may be different than the community that they live in. So it's definitely an unusual experience for them, and they have to basically become more comfortable. And that's another place where we actually use um, expert witness coaches, and they're phenomenal at it.
Yeah, it's a very personal thing, right? When you get sued as a physician or even as a lawyer, right? Nobody sets out to do harm, right? Physicians do not do any harm, but a patient might have a bad outcome, or as you said earlier, the physician or dentist may just not be likable, and, and maybe the patient isn't happy with the end result, and they're going to sue them. So, I would imagine it's really stressful and an emotional challenge for physicians when they have to go on the stand or even at a deposition. So going back to witnesses, expert witnesses, what's important about their CVs, their resumes? Does that even matter? Is the jury really caring about where they went to school and where they did their residency and fellowships?
Absolutely not. Yeah, you can go to Harvard or you can go to a Caribbean medical school. What a jury cares about most is, do they like this person? Can they see this witness as their own doctor? Would they go to this doctor? I mean, that's what's important. Nobody cares. I shouldn't say that. Your credentials are important. People put a lot of effort and time going to the best schools in the country, doing the best they can. But if they rest on their laurels and say, this is my pedigree, you should accept me, that's not going to work.
And what are your thoughts about experts that do this for a living? Let's just call them professional experts. I know we see them at trial a lot where these physicians may practice 10% of the time or 20% of the time, but meanwhile, they're traveling all around the country testifying against physicians. Do you think that plays well with a jury?
It depends. There are some jurors that look at that and say, well, these must be the best doctors in the world because they're used so often. Um, on the other hand, we use the same experts over and over again as well. And just as we're having a problem with the aging of our trial lawyers, we're having the same problem with the aging of our experts. You know, an expert who's no longer practicing is not as effective as a physician who's still in practice. So we're always looking for younger, more effective witnesses. And if any of your listeners are interested in becoming experts, we're interested in looking at their CVs and then speaking with them because it's speaking with them that's going to make the difference.
Yeah, I'm just gonna mention that hopefully maybe some of our listeners will be interested because it is a nice way to help your profession, to give back to the medical community by helping defend a case and then maybe making a little bit extra money as well, right? And we can use experts to testify, but we can also just use them to give us an advice or an opinion on a case or even just for affidavits, right? So it's not always going to trials.
The hard part's going to trial. The easy part is reviewing the case.
Yes, I thought I should throw that out there in case we have any shy doctors. It would maybe want to be helpful. Okay, so this is a very important question, I think. Is every case that is medically defensible winnable?
So in theory, yes. And if you went back to when MLM Insurance Company was started 50 years ago, physicians were on the board and essentially their decisions as to whether a case should be tried or not were followed to a T. And now, over 50 years of experience later, it's a great combination of both insurance professionals and healthcare professionals making a decision whether or not a case can be won and should be tried. So let me give you an example, and you'll see that it's not a simple algorithm. So let's take a case where a patient goes in for robotic chest surgery. The suspicion is that they have a mass in their left upper lobe of their lung. And during the procedure to remove it, or at least biopsy at first, the pulmonary artery is lacerated and the patient experiences a terrible bleed and eventually succumbs to blood loss 10 or 12 days later. On paper, that's a medically acceptable risk of the procedure, a laceration of the pulmonary artery, when you have this type of procedure. However, let me add to the facts where let's assume that the biopsy and the final pathology comes back negative for cancer. Hmm. Now it's a little more challenging, right? Now, let me throw another fact in there. Let's assume the thoracic surgeon is killed in a road rage accident 6 months later and can't testify at trial. Now, this is a really complicated fact pattern that has a lot of twists and turns, and it requires a lot of different views before a decision. So, is it medically defensible? Yes, but it's got a lot of challenges to it.
Yeah, and those are a lot of great points. And also the thing I was thinking of too, like what if the decedent's family make great witnesses? And what if that, if we're gonna say father, was making $500,000 a year and he was 40, right? That's something to think of also.
So you've got a lot of things with your question there. Those are value drivers, the value of the case, the venue, the earnings, the potential, and then the other intrinsic factors. How good the witnesses are. How will they appeal in their venue? The fact that you don't have a defendant to testify, to challenge some things, assuming they get by the dead man statute and the hearsay rules. Um, it's it's what makes law fun because it's not as simple as it always appears.
Exactly, exactly. Now, if a case goes to trial, what do juries really focus on?
The short answer is everything. Um, so, real life example. Imagine me 40 years ago. The hair might have been a little darker, but I'm trying a dental case in Brooklyn. And it's a very low level case because I'm a young lawyer with not a lot of experience at the time. And I have a dentist who asks if his wife could attend the trial. And of course, I say, if you're going to feel more comfortable with her sitting next to you in the back of the courtroom, then yeah, feel free to have her come. Well, she shows up in court with the most expensive fur coat I've ever seen in my life. Needless to say, we lost that case. And I know why we lost this case because my client and his wife exuded wealth versus the plaintiff's family. And there was an appealing aspect to the case and a non-appealing aspect. So what do they focus on? They focus on everything. What do I mean? Eye contact. You know, one thing that used to drive me crazy were videotape depositions. So you may remember from 30 years ago when President Clinton was deposed in the Monica Lewinsky case, and he was asked what your definition of is, and he just looked so terrible with his answer that it really wasn't matter what the spoken word was. It was how he said it. So that's what expert witness coaches do. They teach you how to give eye contact. They teach you how to turn your body to face the jury when you're speaking with them. They teach you to focus on the one or two witnesses or jurors that will smile at you so that you feel more comfortable in your role in the witness box. Um, it's just it's an interesting experience, but one that I think is teachable.
Yeah, and I would imagine juries are really watching, even like facial expressions of defense counsel and plaintiff's counsel, and what the both sides are doing when an expert's on the stand. So, I guess that's they really are watching everything that's going on. Now, you and I have been in this business for a while now, and jurors are getting younger. Though it seems like everybody's getting younger, but jurors are getting younger. What makes today's jurors different than juries from 20, 30, or even 40 years ago? I wouldn't know what was happening 40 years ago. I'm just letting our listeners know that.
So the last case I tried in Queens, I didn't have a juror over 40 years of old or over 40 years of age on my jury. Okay. Um, Add to that, the jurors are much more diverse than ever before. And what impresses me the most is they're different kinds of listeners. Okay. They're actually focused more on the visual than the auditory. And as trial lawyers, you have to use that. You can't just read a medical record to a jury. You need to put the medical record up on a screen where they can see it. And then you can read it to them because as you're reading it to them, you're explaining each word that's in that record and you're making them feel as if they understand exactly what you're talking about, which is the key to success.
What's your opinion on the newer, younger jury and their feelings on value? Because I remember back in the day, it was pretty much every case, or 90% of the cases were a defense verdict, but now they're not only plaintiff's verdicts, a lot of them, they're very large. They're much larger than what they used to be, let's say in the 90s or 2000s.
Well, I do get to see a lot of statistics these days, and the numbers are still very good. So if you were to ask the executives at MLM Insurance Company or MedPro, they will tell you that the success rate when cases are taken to trial are still about 80%. Okay. And that number may have gone up or down a little bit over the years, but it's been pretty stable. What has changed is what you picked up on. We're seeing more nuclear verdicts, and we say nuclear, obviously, out of control verdicts. And there are a lot of factors. Um, One of it may be that those healthcare heroes we were banging pots for 5 years ago no longer viewed the same way they were. And, we can't discount the Luigi Mangione um, syndrome, which is that there are jurors and there is a certain portion of the population that is so anti-health care that the plaintiff's attorneys look to feed onto that to get the jurors angry, angry at the medicine, angry at the fact that you might have to wait 6 months to get an appointment with a doctor, or angry with the fact that, there's a lot of red tape when you might need approval for a CT scan or an MRI. And, that's real world stuff that, is unfortunate, but it's everyday reality. And plaintiffs' attorneys look to feed on that.
And a lot of those issues that you just mentioned really are the physicians don't control it. They don't have any control over some of these things. It's more a systemic issue, right? But unfortunately, the physicians bear the brunt of it.
You're 100% right. But in a courtroom, what they need to do is distinguish themselves from you doctors, which there's an old famous plaintiff's lawyer that used to do that all the time, where instead of talking about you, Dr. Smeltz wants to talk about you as part of the entire profession. And the point is, you have to come across as someone with empathy. You need to come across as someone who cares. And that really does resonate with the jury.
For sure, for sure. Now, my next question, I know it's something that really is upsetting to physicians. What do plaintiffs' lawyers do to try to get you off your game? I know this can be contentious at times. What do you have to say? I know our listeners are going to be excited to hear what you say about this.
So this is the John Ehrman question. They talk smack. That's what they do. All right. They try to bait you. All right. They try to get you angry and bring out the side of you that's just not very nice. So it depends. They do the same thing with young lawyers. They'll try to intimidate and bully them at first and then realize that's not going to work. Okay. They'll try to cajole them and kind of be nice to them and see if that works. And sometimes that works. Okay. But what they'll try to do is to see where your buttons are, and then they're going to push those buttons. So, what these expert witness coaches do, and the really good seasoned trial lawyers do the same thing during prep. They let you know that this is what they're trying to do. And if someone's trying to do that to me, the last thing I'm going to do is give them the satisfaction of letting that happen.
Yeah, it's a tough situation. And I recall I had one doctor years ago. He was not very great at controlling his reaction to this baiting from plaintiff's attorneys, and he would take a beta blocker before he had to testify. So it could kind of like chill him out a little bit.
Well, now they could take gummies, Tammy. Come on.
We're not going to recommend that.
Oh, no, I didn't say it. I just said it's an option in some states. That's all.
No, I know. Okay, so this has really been all fascinating and really fun. What is one takeaway you want our listeners to remember about trials?
So the truth is that credibility is everything. Think about how much is done during the course of a clinical encounter that is not always charted. So, a dentist, you go in for an oral exam. The first thing they're doing is they're checking for oral cancers, the tongues, the gums. Um, but that's not necessarily always recorded. It's always done, but it's not always recorded. Think about a pediatrician who's always checking during an annual exam for scoliosis. They might do what's called an Adams bending forward test, where they're checking for scoliosis, but the only note in their chart might be under muscular skeletal, it might just say negative. So the jury has to believe that that Adams bending forward test was actually done and that it was negative. But the only way they're going to do that is if they believe the witness when he or she says that it was done. And if you think about what a trial actually is, it's about contested or disputed facts. One side says the light was green as I approached it, one side said the light was red, and who's telling the truth? Well, same thing on a failure to diagnose scoliosis case or a failure to diagnose an oral cancer case. It comes down to believing what might not be documented.
I agree. And I guess one way to cover yourself, I'm going to put my risk manager cap on, is just document everything, right?
It helps and be consistent with your documentations.
For sure, for sure. Well, thanks, Roy, for spending time with us today. This was really beyond fun, and I can't wait to have you on next time. We'll have to decide on some fun topic again, and hope to see you soon.
Thanks. Take care.
Thanks. And that's the verdict on what we never learned about trials. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we're looking forward to our next chat with Roy in the future. Stay connected with us. Follow Milmick on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, X, and YouTube for the latest news and updates. This podcast is for general purposes only and should not be construed as medical, dental, or legal advice. This podcast is not comprehensive and does not cover all possible factual circumstances. Because the facts applicable to your situation may vary, or the laws applicable in your jurisdiction may differ, please contact your attorney or other professional advisors for any questions related to legal, medical, dental, or professional obligations, the applicable state or federal laws, or other professional questions.